So I'm going to break the ice just a little bit this evening and start off with the story of my son. I like to do that because my son is this short little 8-year-old redhead, and he's funny, he's smart, but he's also very inquisitive. And this morning, I had the great opportunity of not having to be to work until 8 o'clock in the morning. That's a late day for me. So I got up and I started making breakfast for my kids, and my kids were happy because Dad knows how to make eggs, Mom doesn't know how to make eggs. So I'm making the eggs, and my son is looking at me, and he says, "Dad, I got something I need to talk to you about. I got something I need to show you." I said, "Well, what's that?" He says, "Well, I got this letter from my teacher." Uh-oh. "Aren't you supposed to give that to Mom?" So he gives me the letter from the teacher, and I've got all the worst thoughts, and I grab a cup of coffee so I can handle the situation. And I open up this letter, and it says, "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Linton, your son is going to be given a special award for the best manners."
Wow.
And I looked at this and I said, "You sure this is for me?" So I looked at him, I gave him a fist punch, and I said, "Dude, that's great." And I said, "How'd you do it?" He said, "Well, it's easy." I said, "I just remembered 3 things. I got to say please a lot, I got to say thank you a lot, and I got to say yes, ma'am a lot." So I don't know if Bo Stone is here today. We kind of joked with Bo a little bit today, but I got an 8-year-old winning awards for saying yes, ma'am. And I looked at him and I said, "You know, that's a big deal." And I said, "That's a game changer, and I'm really proud of you." So then he starts asking me about my day, and I tell him about my day and what's going to happen. And then he says, "You're going to be home for dinner." And I said, "No, I'm not going to be home for dinner." And I kind of explained to him what was going to happen this evening. The opportunity to be able to have 3 CEOs from Research Triangle Park to talk about the future of food. And so we talked about it. And as I'm walking out the door, he said, "Dad, I hope it's a big deal tonight, and I hope it's a game changer." Well, I will tell you, I think today and this evening and tomorrow is a big deal. And I think we've got the leadership in North Carolina to truly be game changers. So with that, it is my pleasure to introduce our speakers for this evening. First, I would like to introduce Jim Bloom, President and Chief Executive Officer of Bayer Crop Science. Bayer Crop Science, as we know, is headquartered in RTP. It's a global business with core competencies in the fields of healthcare, agriculture, and high-tech materials. Bayer Crop Science, the subgroup of Bayer AG, is responsible for the agricultural business, is one of the world's leading innovative crop science companies in the areas of seeds, crop protection, and non-agricultural pest control. Jim leads Bayer Crop Science's North American business, headed by its headquarters in RTP, where they employ more than 700 people. Since July 2012, Bayer Crop Science has committed to invest more than $107 million in the RTP area, including new research greenhouse facilities, the North American Bee Care Center, and nearly 70 acres of land to allow for further expansion. Jim knows the agricultural world very well. He grew up on a family farm in Iowa and has more than 25 years of experience in agribusiness. Bayer Crop Science recently announced that it will be investing $1 billion per year in R&D, so we'll look forward to hearing from Jim about what their vision and his vision is for the future of agriculture and food in North Carolina. Second, would you please join me in welcoming Wayne Holden, President and Chief Executive Officer of RTI International. RTI International is one of the world's leading research institutes dedicated to improving the human condition by turning knowledge into practice. Conceived by a handful of scientists in the early days of RTP, RTI International now has a staff of over 3,700 in 75 countries. Wayne became RTI International's 4th president and chief executive officer in 2012. Wayne is a distinguished researcher and clinical psychologist with more than 27 years of professional experience. Prior to joining RTI, he served as president of ORC Macro and had a successful career in academia at the University of Maryland School of Medicine. Dr. Holden is a prolific fellow of the American Psychological Association and provides board leadership in community and business sector organizations. We will also look forward to Wayne's perspective about the future of agriculture and food. Third on our list, it is my pleasure to introduce Nevin McDougall, Senior Vice President, North America Crop Protection, BASF Corporation. BASF Agricultural Solutions is one of 5 business segments comprising BASF, the world's leading chemical company. BASF Agricultural Solutions is subdivided into its crop protection divisions and BASF Plant Science, with global headquarters both in RTP. BASF is the largest agricultural employer in RTP with over 275 plant science employees and 675 in crop protection. They celebrated a $33 million expansion in 2013 to support their growing plant biotech and insect control research. Nevin McDougall joined BASF Canada in 2000 and has traveled the globe in positions with BASF Canada, BASF Southeast Asia, and now with BASF Corporation in RTP. He has served on the Executive Committee of CropLife America and now serves on the sponsors board of the National FFA Foundation. He brings a valuable perspective to the future of plant sciences, crop protection, and agricultural biotechnology business. And finally, our host, Dr. Warwick Arden, Provost and Executive Vice Chancellor, North Carolina State University. The Provost serves as my boss and North Carolina State's Chief Academic Officer, and he has strong roots in agriculture. Before being named Interim Provost, Arden served as the Dean of the North Carolina State College of Veterinary Medicine. Before coming to North Carolina State, Arden served as a professor and department head at the University of Illinois and as a professor of veterinary surgeon at the University of Kentucky and Michigan State University. He is a member of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, the American Veterinary Medical Association, the American College of Veterinary Surgeons, and the Association of American Veterinary Medical Colleges, and the North Carolina Veterinary Medical Association. You're a busy person, Provost. Please join me in welcoming our Provost and his guests and in thanking them for their support as the leading sponsors of the North Carolina Agriculture and Biotechnology Summit.
Thank you, Dean Litton. Good evening, everyone. It's my pleasure to be with you this evening, and certainly with these distinguished panelists as we talk about biotechnology and the future of food. This is a phenomenal area that this university is invested in deeply, and I'm really anxious to hear some of the comments from the thought leaders that are gathered with me tonight. So the way this is going to work is this is going to be a very informal conversation, and seeing we've had a nice meal and these are very comfy chairs, it may become a very informal conversation this evening. We're going to try and stay from football, basketball, or anything else. But we're going to start out with directing questions to each of our panelists or discussants, but then expect the other discussants to also join in and offer thoughts or insight on the topic that we're bringing to light. So I'm going to start first of all with Jim, with our first question. And it's, Jim, as executives of global organizations whose core functions are to be well positioned for the future, You're also an informed citizen who clearly cares about health and well-being of our citizens and cares about the environment as well. How do we get the public to connect corporations, particularly large corporations, with the good people who work there and the good work that is done, rather than the label big is bad?
Great question. Thank you, Dr. Arden. You know, big as bad is a very difficult thing for our industry to overcome. We're down to less than 1% of American population directly related to agriculture. We're more than 3 generations of people away from the farm. And so when people ask me about big as bad, are you taking care of the land? Do you care for the land? I think about farms some of the farms in America now that are about 8th generation or 7th generation. And you think about sustainable ag and you think about what these people are trying to do to get the next generation on their farm. And you have to say they are the people who care the most. Of everybody on this earth, they care the most about that acre of land, and they're going to continue to do what's right to make it sustainable for generations to come. I think it's extremely important that we educate the public on our technology. We have people who don't understand our technology that are automatically against it. And yet that same person will stand in line for 3 hours to get the latest version of the iPhone technology and not understand the difference between how rapidly he adopts technology in most of his life and why he doesn't adopt it in the food industry. And when you ask him and you ask tough questions, and somewhat like Jimmy Kimmel did the other night on his show, they don't know why they're against it, but I'm against it, right? Yeah. So at Bayer Crop Science, we go out of our way to put a face with our company. We try to be visible in the community. We're strong supporters of United Way, Passage Home, a lot of Shepherd's Table, the Backpack program. We do a lot of things in the community to get our people out to mingle, to amplify our 1%, and make our employees out there in the group of the community. I think it's important that we invite them in. At Bayer Crop Science, you can come to our campus. You can visit our Bee Care Center. We can talk to you about how our products work, about how we're doing things for the environment. We opened our Bee Care Center at our RTP campus in April 15th of this year. And since then, we've had almost 2,000 visitors come to our campus with open arms to talk about our technology and what we're doing there. And then finally, we train our employees. We have an ambassador program. CropLife America has its modern agricultural program, an MBA-type program, to train people to be, particularly at this time of the year, when you're getting your employees that are going to holiday parties and what do you do, who do you work for, giving them that strength and that confidence to talk about what they do. It's a noble adventure to go out and feed the world. Here's what we're doing about it. We only have so much farmland to do. Higher yields through technology is the only way we're going to have a safe and peaceful world, and I'm part of it every day.
Great answer. Thank you, Jim. Wayne or Nevin, any
Sure.
additional comments?
Yeah. So, the organization I lead is a little bit different because we're not academics, we're not for-profit, we're a not-for-profit organization whose mission is to improve the human condition. So generally, when you look at it from our perspective, it's about tackling big problems. It's about, as you tackle big problems, communicating effectively to people that you're making a difference, helping them to understand that, understanding that communication is a complex issue, and that communication starts from the beginning of an idea. It doesn't start at the end of an idea. I don't know how many times I've been in problem-solving sessions with great, bright people, and at the end there was a communication plan that had to be put together, and there was nobody there who understood how to communicate. Came up with a great solution, but should have happened from the beginning. So it's about having that ingrained in your spirit, being willing to tackle big problems, being willing to make a difference, getting that out there. And really, that starts really from the heart and the soul of the organization. That's really where it begins. It's not a mechanistic kind of issue that you embed in an organization. It's all about who you are as people and what you do, just like the last comments that you made.
Yeah, similar comments from my perspective in terms of employee engagement. It really is the first step on the journey. Upon reflection of today's speakers and the panel sessions we had, it's clear we've got a very, very big topic to deal with. And As one of my colleagues mentioned to me today, it's a really big elephant we've got to chew, and it's probably not a good topic at dinner time, chewing an elephant. But that being said, it's step by step really to engage your people, engage your organization, and show them the vision of what we're trying to achieve. Just a very small example of what we try to do at the RTP site here for BSF is our engagement in the local food bank. And I think one of the statistics today was the number of North Carolinians who actually go hungry every night. We're very active with the Central Food Bank of North Carolina, and upwards of 500,000 people in the central part of the state go hungry every night. So that's been a charity that we've really been able to engage our staff with and really make that linkage to supporting the local community, have a mission around food availability, and really getting the whole organization aware of the needs for the future.
You think that some of the issue perhaps surrounds the fact that your corporations, your entities are built on, to a large degree, cutting-edge science. And sometimes we as scientists are not the greatest communicators of what we do. And I know at NC State, and this isn't meant to be a shameless plug for NC State, but that is my job, we have a large program across multiple colleges focused on the public communication of science. And it seems to me that as we move forward, that has to be a critical component of it, is how we present science to the public and public understanding of science and the roles that that plays in your corporations.
I agree with that. A lot of times when we're trying to discuss or we get into a discussion with someone who has a different position than our industry has, we get confronted with, I don't want to hear about your science. That's not my data. That's your data. And we're so used to standardized data, peer-reviewed studies, sound science, that a published study really means something. It's well-defined to us, but it's not to others. And in other countries where scientists and other people have taken advantage of that, or there's been corruption in the system, they don't believe in that system, and that's a very dangerous place to be.
Thank you.
I think maybe one aspect that we've overlooked in our communication strategies has been the importance of the human connection, the emotional aspects of food and how food is produced. I've seen in the last 10, 15 years a lot of different communication strategies trying to connect public concerns with science. And invariably, we often struggle, if not fail, because we've missed that human connection and the fact that food is a very personal and emotional aspect. And I think as we learn more about how different communities respond to food and the issues pertaining to our food supply, I think we'll be able to tailor and be a little more specific and targeted in our communication strategies going forward. So for me, it's all around the emotion and that personal connection.
Can I add something? So I think one of the big challenges with communication, too, is how fast that changes. I was in a discussion earlier today where we were, dealing with social media metrics. In terms of things a few years ago, we wouldn't have been looking at social media metrics with respect to what's happening with information. So I think it's a big challenge to keep moving ahead and keep staying ahead of the game in terms of how things are being communicated, what individual consumers and individuals in the world have access to, what they learn about, how they interpret it, et cetera, et cetera.
And social media can be a double-edged sword. It can be a powerful tool for communications. It can also be a powerful tool for miscommunication about certain issues. So we're living in a different age about the way information spreads and how it spreads. Next question I'm going to direct, first of all, to you, Wayne. This is kind of a fun question because it's one that just allows you to think out loud. So as a leader, you're also really a futurist. There has to be a certain part of your jobs that asks you to look into the future, to read the tea leaves. What do you see as the future of food? In other words, when we think 10, 20, 30 years down the road, what comes to mind in terms of food production and how will it look different from today?
First of all, I think you're right. Yes, leaders are responsible for looking into the future. I also think that's always a challenge for leaders and organizations because you're always trying to get your staff, your employees to get more future-oriented because they're usually caught up in today's success, everything they've done to get to this point in time, what has to happen next week, what happens to happen next month, next year, rather than 5 years, 10 years. And in the work that we do, although there are declines in funding availability, there's not a huge burning platform that pushes people to have to change. You know, sometimes in the commercial sector, you may have a change of 30 to 40% in your top line revenue year over year. Well, that's dramatic and that gets people to change. When you have a slow or flat level of funding that's available, people tend to stay in place. So I think that's one of the biggest challenges is to project into the future and to sometimes, to a point that people get a little bit irritated, is continue to create a sense of urgency about the future and what people need to be doing as they're moving ahead. If I think into the future about the issues of food and food productivity, I guess what I think about more than anything are what are the key factors that are going to influence what we end up doing. So it's obviously scarcity is a huge issue moving into the future, and that's going to be a big dynamic and a foundational dynamic that's going to push lots of change. But kind of the response to scarcity at one level is technology. And from my perspective, I have complete and total faith in technology. I feel that technology continues to evolve and innovations continue to occur. Resource constraints always push greater innovations into the future, and we solve problems. So I think what will happen across time is the scarcity issue is going to even ramp up even further technology innovations that are going to come into play. The other factors that I think about are things like climate variability. Certainly, I was walking in here today and I said, I don't live in North Carolina to experience these types of temperatures today, right? We don't. What is that a function of? It's a function of climate variability that's going to have more and more of an impact on what happens with agricultural production across time. Another variable that I think is really important and also relates to technology in a little bit different way is data. Huge amounts of data, more and more expertise with learning how to use that data effectively, efficiently, to drive processes, to drive decision making. And that's only going to become a more refined and better aspect of our lives across time. I do not believe that we're going to drown in data at some point. It will be easier and easier and easier for us to be able to take massive amounts of information and make sense of the world and make great decisions driving forward. And then the last thing I think about with respect to food and more food availability rather than food production is the whole issue of urbanization and what's happening with respect to megacities and the growth of megacities and populations living in urban environments. And what implication does it really have for production of food, but also for the infrastructure around food, food safety issues, all those kinds of things. So rather than being able to tell you this is how things look to me in 10 or 20 years, I think those are some of the 5 or 6 variables and forces that are going to drive things in a direction that I think is going to be a positive outcome with increased uses of technology and data that are going to deal with the scarcity problem. And then we're going to hopefully figure out what to do about climate variability and the urbanization issues along the way.
Great. Thank you, Wayne. Jim or Neville?
Yeah, maybe a few comments to add to Wayne's points. You know, like Wayne, I'm also a strong believer in technology. I'm an optimist. I think we will be able to tackle our grand challenge that we face over the next 35 years, driven by technology, but also by people, by putting bright, smart people working collaboratively to find their way around the tough challenges and problems that we have ahead of us. So I believe that we will find the solutions, that we'll make progress. But I think what we'll see to achieve that is more and more integration of the various technologies and approaches that can be employed to have more yield per acre, have more productivity. So I think we've just started in that journey in the last 5-10 years where we're looking at integrating crop protection and biotech as we look at biologicals, biological control mechanisms. I think we'll see more and more of an integration of all these different technologies to really maximize the effect that we can have on plants and have greater impact than we could ever imagine. So from my perspective, I see more and more integration, but to Wayne's point, leveraging data to really assess what is really the critical lever to see those yield responses. I think that the other big area I see for food in the future is the notion of sustainability. And I don't like using the word too often because it is used to excess in many cases. But I think looking at the concerns we have over soil, over water, over the impact that our industry has on the environment, I think we have to take greater care and think much more proactively of the impact that our technologies and the integration of all these systems has on the environment, on the effect it has on our food, the food that we're producing, and start to build that into our R&D models and into the approaches that we take in bringing new technologies forward. So this notion of sustainability and looking at the economic, societal, and environmental factors, I think has to become a filter through which new technologies and new approaches get put through to see how that fits and works in the long term.
Right.
So those would be some of the big topics I think about, Dean.
Thanks, Devin. Dr. Kim?
Just a couple comments. I think we'll move from measuring bushels per acre to crop per drop, right? Measuring the efficiency of how we're using fresh water. When we look to the future, we're a biotech company, so we already know our future because it takes 10 years to get deregulated. We know what the next 10 years probably is going to look like in technology. And so the question is, what after that, right? And I think it really comes down to a very basic question of the free market. What does the free market want, right? I was asked the other day, why do we grow corn in Iowa instead of cucumbers or lettuce, right? And there's a long answer to that, but the short answer is because that's what the market wants. The market, if they get some wealth, wants to buy a T-bone steak and not turnip greens, right? And so if the market wants something differently, it'll dictate how we put a business model together. And you see some corners of society trying to change that of what we should be eating and how we should be eating, and therefore changing the market. And we're listening, but that's going to dictate what we do.
Great. Thank you. So, Nevin, the next question I'm going to direct to you first. At the university, such as NC State, we try to provide a general education to our students, particularly in critical and creative thinking skills, and give them a broad foundation for how to succeed in the future. This is really a workforce development question. Can you share an example of the way in which creative thinking, thinking outside of the box, working with diverse groups, produced a game-changing strategy or a new product for your company?
Yeah, I can think of a number of examples of diverse teams, and from my career background, I've lived through a number of acquisitions in our industry, and it's amazing what acquisitions and mergers will do to bring diverse teams together and very different backgrounds. So I have a lot of direct experience in that regard, and I can think of one example where putting very different teams together in a very difficult financial solution resulted in a lot of organizational changes to our business structure that really turned our business around and got us going. A very recent example would be the recent acquisition we've made of Becker Underwood, a company very much focused in the area of biologicals. And by bringing in new expertise, very different backgrounds into the company, already we're seeing some very promising results as far as brand new development concepts combining biological and traditional crop protection technologies that can be combined for additional synergy. So I think there's a very tangible example of how we're bringing in different talents of different background and perspective to really go into brand new directions and bring something very novel and unique to our customers in the marketplace.
Great.
That's been my experience.
Thank you, Nevin. Jim, Wayne?
Just a couple of examples. A lot of people know Bayer as the aspirin company first in our pharmaceutical division. And we're looking at ideas that come across there. Everybody probably in their pocket has a phone with a very nice camera on it. And what we're looking at is the lens on this camera has been so refined by now that we're using it in our diabetes care to examine how much blood and what you need to do on the app to do that. We're looking at bringing that technology into the agronomist's hands and tissue analysis and doing in-field analysis on what's going on with apps and using that same technology. So really a different technology because we're related, thinking about things differently. And our second example would be because our products are becoming more and more efficacious at lower and lower levels, we need to apply with precision. So we took our global leading seed treatment business and put it together with our equipment team and created the on-demand system, which puts on very precise computerized release of recipes, inventory management, and exactly what you need on that seed per bushel, and automates it all the time and reports it back and allows us to service it remotely as a part of different ideas coming from diverse backgrounds and leading to just better use and better stewardship.
Great. Thanks.
So I think the issue is, it's really important to bring together people with different perspectives when you're trying to attack a particular problem, right? And within any organization, you have those available to you. But it's a global world, and there are people all over. So it really is incumbent upon you to reach out to partners, to reach out in any particular scenario to people from other parts of the world, and to work together collaboratively in that sense. And I think that kind of sparks greater creativity, greater innovation, and solutions that have much more of a broader impact in the world. We found that to happen in collaboration with partners who are funders, who are willing to take those risks. The Gates Foundation, for example, is willing to go out and take those risks and try to attack a really big problem in a very innovative and creative way, knowing that a lot of the things that they do are probably going to fail and a few things are going to survive. There are other funders we're working with in Australia now that are interested in trying to change the whole knowledge system in Indonesia. And they're willing to really take a whole different approach in doing that in collaboration with us to try to improve the data that's collected and improve the way policymakers make decisions based on that. So you have to find those partners around the world who can come together with you to help support the creativity, to participate in the creativity, and to drive broader innovation.
Great. Thank you, Wayne. Jim, the next question, I'll start with you on a response. And I think it's a really interesting question. What do you see as the role of underdeveloped countries in the future of food? If you step aside from the political situation, do you foresee a time when we can provide enough tools to grow crops in marginal lands and allow these areas even to become food export centers without compromising sustainability?
That's a great and interesting question. When I was a little bit younger, I watched Czechoslovakia and some of that area change hands and become industrialized very quickly when they put the new governments in. And some of those countries skipped going to the traditional telephone and wire line and went straight to cellular technology. They just leapfrogged. And in use in India and some of those, the amount of technology and the race at which they were putting that in was much better. They skipped. In developing countries, I think what we're seeing, particularly in Africa, is in these marginal lands where we're addressing this through biotechnology and we're putting the technology in seed that they already know what to do with, so we don't have an education issue, but we can get the technology through them. We don't have to ship in the backpack sprayers. We don't have to do the math titration calculations. We don't have to worry about timing and the education of the agronomy, but we can do what they've been doing and make their lives much better and bring technology right to that land. And I think that's where underdeveloping nations will leapfrog, like they did without telephone poles. And also, I think people, they're not afraid of technology. And I have to give my hands off to people like Bill and Melinda Gates, who help support that and buy that and say this is the path. Get over the fears. This is the way we're going to feed the world, and this is why we're going to do it. So hats off to them for helping us break through the barrier. We got the science and the innovation thing down. We need the market acceptance, and then that's the way I see underdeveloping growing.
Thanks, Jim. Wayne, Nevin?
From my perspective, what happens in low and middle income countries is going to be really important in terms of this particular problem in the future, because the opportunity for improvement in yields is pretty substantial. I think the problems, as you noted, are pretty significant, involve a lot of different factors that cross the economic and political spectrum with respect to being able to sustain direction and sustain changes. I think there's also complications when you have other countries that are more developed buying massive amounts of land in low-income countries, not so much to create a sustainable venture for the low-income country, but to be able to import those products back into their country across time. So, I think it's a complex set of issues, but I think it's an important part of the equation as we move forward over the next couple decades.
Yeah, the only aspect I would add is if we look at where population growth will develop over the next 35 years, it's Asia and Africa. And so I think to the extent that we can support getting technologies into those geographies so that there's a domestic food base developed so that we avoid the freight, the transportation issues, tariff issues, trade issues, I think will be very important to ensure that sustainable food supply in the future. And the willingness to adopt technology is there, and it's very high. I think as Jim elaborated, skipping over steps to adopt technology quickly is quite apparent. One very good example from my experience is a herbicide-tolerant system that we've introduced into Africa that addresses a very vicious weed called striga that prevents the cultivation of corn, of maize, in many African countries. So we've been able to introduce a technology that controls a very invasive weed and allows actually a productive plant to be grown and harvested. So I think there's an example where we've been able to take a technology, adapt it for an emerging market where marginal land conditions prevail and had real success.
Right.
But it involves people, commitment, and really strong cooperations with local partners to make it happen.
Great. Thank you. This is our last question. And so I will direct this to Wayne, but I'm sure we'll have input from all of our discussants. So at NC State, one of our mottos, our principal motto is think and do. We'd like to be an institution that is focused around discovery and the translation of that discovery. But sometimes the barriers to delivering solutions are not technology, but rather are social, political, economic, or regulatory. What do you see as the most significant obstacles to our challenge to feed our citizens and the citizens of the world?
That's interesting you addressed that question to the social scientist on the panel. I don't know if that was intentional or not. So my own personal bent in terms of my background, obviously, is that what ends up happening is we end up investing money in technology, investing money in developing technology. We do a pretty good job with that. I'm very comfortable with technological solutions that are going to come to bear on problems and issues. We spend less time thinking about the social issues. We spend less time thinking about the cultural and the behavioral issues that will influence adoption and influence implementation. It's not just the issue in this particular area, it's across many, many research areas where we do that. And then what ends up happening is you have a big lag between initial discovery and full implementation and effect because of those complexities that are there and that oftentimes are under-resourced in terms of attention relatively early on. They become resourced with respect to attention when it's clear that those are obstacles and barriers to being able to change things out in the world. So, my perspective is that that is a big, important part of the equation with respect to adoption and being able to facilitate changes across time, regardless of what the technology is.
Great. Thank you. Nevin? Jim?
Yeah, similar perspective. I think in a lot of cases it comes down to communication, appreciating the perspective, the experience of the of the other party, of the culture that we're trying to engage and exchange with. I see that even within large multinational corporations like our own, where to implement a similar type of technology into another region or country, there's always that lag, and it's sometimes it's a mindset of not invented here, or fear of the unknown to a certain extent. So I think the more that we can appreciate the perspective of others in that exchange and that deployment of the technology, to try and bridge communication, to understand the emotions behind, change and how that takes shape, I think will be critical to go forward. I think we had multiple examples today of communication gaps and different agendas,
Right.
and where those might be driven that can create those barriers. So from my perspective, I think going forward, it's really the communicators that are going to have to help us break through and lead the way.
It never ceases to amaze me when we have this discussion, the realization that technology doesn't exist in a void. It exists and is utilized within a society. And having very clear social contexts around the adoption and the utilization of technology can often really make the difference on whether the technology is adopted and used or not. And so we do try to bring this together from a student perspective as we prepare students to make sure that they are working in interdisciplinary teams that bring together the bench scientists, the social scientists, the communicators, so that they're really thinking about what does this mean in a social context? How do we bring change about? Jim?
I think, what's the biggest barrier, really what's the most important thing for us, and that's a regulatory system that works. We have to make decisions based on sound science. If we're going to make decisions on regulatory based on likes on a homepage or on a Facebook page, we're lost. Because if we don't have a dependable, predictable regulatory pathway, we can't afford to invest, in our case, $1 billion a year into a system if you don't know what the rules are and they keep changing and they're at the whim of who was amplified on what Facebook page today or which blogger got the most hits today. We just can't. So that's probably the biggest barrier for making decisions based on sound science is paramount.
Great. Thank you, gentlemen. This has been a great discussion. We really appreciate your time this evening. I'm sure you'll join with me in thanking our discussants, Jim, Wayne, and Nevin. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Provost Arden and the panel. And I should also reach out and provide a special thanks to our 3 lead sponsors of the 2-day program, which is BASF, RTI International, and Bayer Crop Science. Let's give them all a hand for their participation.